When I reviewed the Sony 51.2 GM lens a year ago, I ended that review by saying that as much as I loved the ultra-wide aperture of that lens, I couldn't help but wish that Sony made a smaller and lighter f1.4 version. Cue my surprise and excitement whenever Sony did just that. This is the new 50mm f1.4 GM, and while I realize that this is the third 50mm lens that they sell, if you factor in the 51.2 and the older Zeiss 51.4, and now this version, and heck, let's throw in the 55 1.8 also, so that's 4 lenses at roughly the 50mm focal length. But I have to say, this 51.4 is my favorite. And today I'm going to be reviewing this lens from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker. So if you are someone that films weddings or documentaries, or you're a filmmaker like me that just loves the 50mm focal length, you're going to love this video. Also, because I respect your time, I actually am going to spoil the conclusion of this review right now and tell you that if you haven't guessed by my excitement about it already, the new 51.4 GM is, in my opinion, the best 50mm that Sony has ever made. And while it may not attain the heights of bokeh that the 51.2 GM reaches, this 51.4 is dramatically lighter, it's going to feel very well balanced on your camera, it's incredibly sharp, and more than anything, I get the same feeling that I get when using this 50 that I do when using the 24mm 1.4 GM, which to date is still my favorite lens that Sony has pretty much ever made. So in short, if you're someone that uses Sony's 24 GM lens and you love it, I think you're going to love this 51.4 as well. Okay, you got to watch the rest of the video if you want to hear my thoughts. Before I jump into that though, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know that this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony in any way, but they did send me this lens so I can review it, and I will be sending it back to them very soon. And I'm very sad about that, but I will say that I'm also very excited to be purchasing this lens as soon as it is actually available. Jumping right into it then, I want you to come along with me. Yes, come back in time with me now to the year 2017. I had purchased a Sony a7S II about a year and a half prior, and as someone that loved the Canon EF 51.2, which is still a fantastic lens in my opinion, I wanted a lens that would be similar to that, but would also give me the benefits of a native Sony lens like autofocus. So I looked around and I saw that Sony sold a Zeiss 51.4 lens for about $1,500. This was a hefty chunk of change, so to save money and make sure that I actually wanted to use it, I chose to rent this lens before I bought it. And I gotta say, I am so glad that I did, because I hated that lens. Yes, I hated it. It was awful. Super heavy, the autofocus was slow, it felt unbalanced, and the flaring was, in a word, terrible. My main issue with a lot of the older Sony Zeiss lenses is that they were, in a word, clinical. The flaring was minimal, and the flaring that you did get was really bland and uninteresting. The footage was sharp, but it felt almost over sharp, and overall the colors just felt cold. Like I said, it was clinical. If I was filming a doctor in an operating room, I may have chosen that lens. That's how bad it was. And I'm so glad that I only rented it for a week and then I returned it and I never bought it. Anyways, my lack of satisfaction with this Zeiss 50 from Sony led me to continue using that Canon 51.2, as well as adventuring off into the land of vintage lenses, which had far more character. Thankfully, Sony did start to lure me back with their 51.2 GM lens, which, as I said at the start of this video, I reviewed last year and I was very impressed by it, with my only hangup being the weight of the lens. It's not as big as the 51.2 options from other camera companies, to be clear, but it's still pretty hefty. This year though, it feels like Sony finally heard the cry of my heart, because I was so incredibly overjoyed whenever they announced this 51.4. So let's talk about it. The first thing that you're going to notice about this lens whenever you use it is the size and weight. This thing is dramatically lighter than the 51.2, and while it is about 80 grams heavier than the 24 1.4 at 516 grams, this thing is still quite light. Testing this lens, I filmed with it at a wedding where I used it to film establishing shots as well as dancing footage at the reception. Throughout all of this, I was handheld. I didn't put on a gimbal or use any other stabilization. I wanted to feel how this lens felt as a very lightweight handheld setup on a camera, and I gotta say, it felt great. More than just a feel though, visually this lens is very impressive as well. It's very sharp and the bokeh feels really creamy, which is great. To be clear, you're not going to get the ridiculous level of bokeh that you would get with a 51.2, but personally, I typically find myself filming at f2 because I don't want to completely overwhelm whatever I'm filming with bokeh. So when I was filming with the 51.4, I never felt myself wishing like I needed it at 1.2. So overall, from an image quality and feel standpoint, this lens feels in line with Sony's other GM lenses, and more importantly, it feels dramatically better than their old Zeiss 51.4. There's nothing clinical here. All right, other than the feel and look of this lens, of course, it's a GM lens, which means that it comes with all the bells and whistles that you would normally get with a GM lens from Sony, but they added something new too. An iris lock switch here on the side will prevent the lens switching between being controlled by the aperture control ring or the electronic mode of your camera. So if you've ever accidentally bumped your lens and switched to the aperture control ring, this lock is a nice touch that will prevent that. Of course, you're getting all the other GM lens features too, like programmable buttons and an aperture control ring on the lens that has a clickless switch, autofocus, manual focus toggle, it's all there. Speaking of autofocus and manual focus, now I'm pleased to tell you that this lens also performs incredibly well in both of those settings. When I was filming the reception dancing, I really prefer to toggle back and forth between autofocus and manual focus, where I will autofocus on someone's face while they're dancing, but if they turn around and face away from me, I will then disable autofocus so that way the camera does not begin hunting for another face to focus onto. The 51.4 handled filming in this way very well, and anytime I toggled the autofocus back on, it would lock onto faces incredibly quickly, which was great. Now, in regards to lens breathing, when I tested it, this lens did exhibit breathing. So if you are planning on getting this lens to use for talking head interviews, etc., where it's locked off on a tripod, you may want to look at alternatives. But in the case of wedding filmmaking, where you're oftentimes either handheld or on a gimbal, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Next, let's talk about the price of the 51.4. Sony has told me they're going to be pricing this lens at $1,300, which is definitely a healthy chunk of change. But whenever you consider that the 51.2 is $2,000 at the time of making this video, $700 less for only a 0.2 f-stop difference isn't bad. That said though, I'm sure that some of you are planning to type right now, Matt, what about Sigma? And it's true. Sigma did just release a 51.4 that is a direct competitor to this lens. And at $850 at the time of making this video, that Sigma is a substantial savings. Unfortunately, I have not had time to test that Sigma lens yet, but I will say that I have loved using Sigma lenses in the past, and I'm betting their 50mm is very good. Other than the price though, there is one other big difference between the Sigma and the Sony though, and that is the weight. Remember, this Sony 51.4 is 516 grams, which is quite light. This new Sigma 1.4 comes in at a heavier 660 grams, so you're really gonna have to weigh your decision between these two lenses. Pun intended. If price is a bigger factor, go with Sigma, but if you want to prioritize a lightweight lens, go with Sony. So, would I recommend buying this new Sony 51.4? Well, let me put it this way. I am planning on buying it. As I said at the start of this video, I loved what Sony did with the 51.2, but I was wishing that they would make a smaller and more lightweight f1.4 lens because I feel like that lens would be exactly what I was looking for. And it was. So if you've tried the 51.2 and it feels a little bit too heavy for you and that price tag is a little high and you're looking around and the 55 1.8 isn't going to cut it, and let's not even talk about that old Zeiss 51.4, I really think that this new 51.4 GM is the Goldilocks moment for a 50mm lens from Sony. It's not too big, it's not too heavy, it's not too clinical, it's just right. I'll link to it down below if you want to check it out. And also down below, I'm going to link to a free guide that I've put together called Edit Videos Like a Pro. This guide is going to walk you through some of the most important things that took me years to learn as a video editor. I think it's going to be super helpful to you. You can download it, the link down in the video description completely for free. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.